Hello, workers and comrades. I'm coming from my humble home down here in rural North Carolina, and I couldn't be more happier to be anywhere else than with my friends and comrades here at the Center for Political Innovation. And boy, do we have a great show for you tonight. Theme of tonight's presentation is Socialist Patriotism in America. I know that's an interesting topic among the left, but we're going to get into it. As we always do, is custom. We're going to start with our anti-war pledge. Caleb, take it away.
Sure. Well, when we were forming the Center for Political Innovation, we thought we would adopt the Pledge of Unity that was created by the World Democratic Youth Federation after the Second World War to be our unity pledge for the Center for Political Innovation. In 1947, in the aftermath of the Second World War, people from all over the world gathered in Czechoslovakia to form the World Democratic Youth Federation. And the pledge that they all pledged together is slightly adopted to be the pledge of the Center for Political Innovation. So if everyone could please raise your right hand, we will read the pledge. We pledge that we shall remember this unity forged at the end of the Second World War, not only today, not only this week, or this year, but always. Until we have built the world we have dreamed of and fought for. We pledge ourselves to build the unity of the people of the world, all races, all colors, all nationalities, all beliefs, to eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth, to build a deep and sincere international friendship among the people of the world, to keep a just, lasting peace, to eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness. We have come to confirm the unity of all the people, to salute our comrades who have died, and to pledge that our words, our skillful hands, our keen brains, our bold enthusiasm shall never more be wasted in war.
Powerful stuff, comrade. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a beginning presentation to get us started off here. So, like I said again, tonight's show is Socialist Patriotism in America. And I figured I'd come back with, my own story and the journey I've had. And it didn't, I didn't always come off as, a flag waving patriot. And I'll get into that. I think when I was, when I was a real young kid, maybe kindergarten or what have you, I used to look up to, people in the military as disciplined and strong and doing something positive for our country and our community. And I wanted to join the military. I wanted to do something bigger than myself and do something for my family and my community. And that didn't last long. I started, by the time I was like 14, I started to see something ain't right. I looked at the way that working folks were treated. I looked at the way my dad, made barely above minimum wage, and how, 8 of us in horrible living situations. And, and there's these dreams of rich folks on the televisions and the advertisements and what have you. And like, something's not adding up exactly to us all working together for the benefit of our communities. We got these big fours and we're the strongest and best country on earth. What is going on? And, my initial reaction to being duped, to being lied to for so many years was anger and hatred. I couldn't stand it. I looked around at the way our immigrant brothers and sisters are being treated. I learned of the situation of our undocumented coworkers and classmates at the time, and the stories of their families about how they were forced by our economic system here, by policies like NAFTA, forced from their homelands through destitute poverty to cross the desert, and many who died in the desert. And then come here and then work. Even I looked at how my dad was treated. And I looked at how my neighbors were treated. And undocumented workers were treated even less and paid even less and had even less rights than us. And then I started analyzing and looking into these wars. I'm not sure what was exactly. Maybe my dad's kind of Quaker background, kind of peace outlook from a Christian point of view, that Jesus was a pacifist. Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Great country singer, country folk singer, who was also a letter carrier, John Prime, wrote a song, your flag detail ain't going to get you into heaven anymore. Wars are they're already overcrowded from your dirty little wars. Jesus don't like killing, no matter what the reasons for. Kind of, and then the Dixie Chicks, you talk about, they was the first people to get canceled. This is 2003. They didn't even sing a song. They didn't even get to sing an anti-war song before this was in the era of, vehement national chauvinism and preparation for war in 2003. And Dixie Chicks were the first people to get canceled. It was we talked about cancel culture. It was the right wing that started off with this cancel culture stuff. I think there's a beautiful song by the Dixie Chicks that's called, I think the Traveling Soldier. Talk about a young girl that falls in love with a traveling soldier, and the soldier dies in Vietnam, and she's heartbroken, and she never loves again. And I heard that song recently, sung at karaoke at the county fair. And then you also had these horrible stuff like this, think about like what they did to twist us, the lies they did to convince decent working people to support these disgusting, horrible wars. I look at there's also horrible pro-war national chauvinist country music like Toby Keith, who went on to talk about, proud to be an American and put a boot in your ass because it's the American way. Some kind of male chauvinist, very toxic, masculine bullshit, if you ask me. Basically saying, oh, it's the American way to slaughter and mass murder Iraqi civilians. For what? For what? What good does it do us here? What good does it do working people? What good does it do oppressed people here in the United States? It doesn't. So I posted my fair share of burning American flags or what have you. And there's something I want to say about this as well. I've kind of come around on this issue, and I'll talk about that later on. But I think it is of the utmost importance if we're going to push for a better patriotism, a socialist patriotism, a patriotism that actually loves the various peoples and cultures within the United States and is fighting for a better future and a better world. We have to have respect for the oppressed nations. That means if Afro-American people or Chicano people want nothing to do with U.S. patriotism, we are not going to force it on them. And that is the right of self-determination before and after the revolution. So I'll get into my own experience. So, I'm looking along these people, and I'm angry at them, and I'm mad at them. They're waving their U.S. flags. I'm like, you're supporting the war. You're supporting the oppression of our immigrant brothers and sisters. Why do you have that? And maybe there is a lot of what is behind national chauvinism is racism. But what good is it for me to attack working class neighbors, to go to them and say, you're nothing, stop that, and attack them, and to fight these cultural wars? What good does that do us, to keep us divided amongst ourselves, while this small group of banking cartels walk all the way to the bank with all the money and continue these wars and keep us divided. They want us to be divided. How do we actually build this country? How do we actually build a socialist future? How do we build power that can respect oppressed nations and end these wars and end the system of imperialism? And the answer is we have to be city builders. And there is no better example than the socialist and revolutionary movements coming from the global South. When the Venezuelans wanted their freedom and economic justice and to escape the boot of imperialism, they didn't go around their country saying, we hate Venezuela. It's run by the bourgeoisie. It's run by the periods. Fuck Venezuela, burn the Venezuelan flag. They did not do that. They said, we love Venezuela. We love our country. They built a broad anti-neoliberal coalition, took power and kicked out the imperialists, kicked out the banking class, kicked out this same group of banking cartels hooked in with the oil companies that are oppressing the people in the global South and that are destroying our lives right here for working class brothers and sisters in the United States. So I think we can look to that. And recently was the the centennial for the Chinese Communist Party. And I encourage everyone to read the speech given by Xi Jinping. And, you know, China suffered a century of humiliation. The Opium Wars. The British forced drugs into the country to keep the country poor. Just like now, as they first did in the inner cities with Afro-American black and brown brothers and sisters, with the crack epidemic, ties to the CIA, to keep oppressed communities down, get them hooked on drugs, use the drug war to funnel them into the prison system, the new Jim Crow, the mass incarceration. What started in the late 70s and 80s has spread to rural America with the epidemic of the opioid crisis, and methamphetamines have destroyed communities. Just as the English did to the Chinese in the century of humiliation. And Comrade Xi Jinping told the people, we are a great people. We love our country. And look what we have done in the last few decades. We went through a century of humiliation and now are the second largest economy in the world. Fast trains, medical care, education. The amount of progress, the material progress that's seen by the Chinese people through socialism is enormous. And they are an example to the world. But how does that translate here in the belly of the beast, in the empire? I think we should take leadership from our comrades in the global South and say, we love this country. We love our neighbors. We love our cultures. We love our communities. We are the international American proletariat. And we are tired of being exploited. We are tired of being underpaid. And we are tired of these endless wars in our name. Thank you, comrades. We'll go on to our first speaker, Chris Halali. Introduce yourself, comrade.
Comrades, it's a dear pleasure to be with you all and to everybody viewing. My name is Christopher Halali. I'm a farmer here in Vermont. I'm a proud Iranian American and Greek American. I was the first communist to run for Congress since the mid-90s, almost 30 years ago. So had the election last year and came in with 1%, which was huge, with communists on the ballot. And I'm a current graduate student at Dartmouth College. It's a pleasure to be here. We're at CPI and to be part of this conversation, which I think is very important. When I went off to college in 2007. One of the things that was tough for me, as it is for so many people in the United States, was how to pay for my education. I was the first person to graduate from university in my family. And so part of that was figuring out, how am I going to pay for it? How am I going to pay for school? What am I going to do? And like so many other Americans, you know, looking for different choices, and the gig economy was not really a big thing back then. It was the military. And so I decided, even though I had been anti-war, even though I had been protesting against the wars in Iraq and was very vocal, and was following great people like George Galloway, who at that time was an MP for the Respect Party, and Bethnal Green and Bow. And I was a high schooler following that very intently. And I signed up. I signed up. I said, you know, I have to pay for my education. I have to pay. I have to continue to build myself as a person. You know, my parents, you know, gotta continue to advance. We came to this country with nothing, so you have to build yourself. You have to build. You have to be part of the community. You have to be educated. So I joined the military, and quickly I realized that the military as an institution, and of course this is a difficult topic for many people on the left, and we're going to get into that. But the military is not homogenous. It's not like everybody in the military is waving the American flag and has the Trump sticker, for example, in the past 4 years, a hardcore right wing. No, in fact, it's a very diverse cross section of the American society. And you have two distinct classes in the military. You have the enlisted and you have the officer corps. And so when you look at that, you can also see the class differentiations in our society, right? Those people who were the elites, who went to the academies like West Point, like Annapolis, you know, like the Air Force Academy. And then you had people who came from inner city, rural areas, people who had no opportunities. And this was a job opportunity. This was an opportunity for advancement. And so when people speak of the poverty draft, it's a reality. Even in an all-volunteer army, it's a reality, because it's an opportunity for people to go and get an education. It's an opportunity for people to go and get healthcare. It's an opportunity for people to go and see the world where they otherwise wouldn't. And so when you look at that, you say, this is kind of a socialist institution, isn't it? At its core, it provides for its people. It provides for the well-being of their families and their communities. But it does not provide for the well-being of everybody outside of the borders, right? The wars, the empire, patrolling oil fields, patrolling poppy fields in Afghanistan. You know, when you look at the destruction that it's done, you begin to ask very serious questions, and rightly so. In the military, I was in the military total of 4 years as a cadet. In my undergraduate years, I became commissioned as an officer in 2011, and then I was in the reserves. I got out of going to Afghanistan by going to the chaplain corps. And while I was in the chaplain corps, I was able to resign my commission due to very big disagreements with leadership at the time. The main thing was, a lot of good people were in the military. A lot of people who didn't have the luxury and the privilege to do what I did. A lot of people who really needed the job, really needed to bring home the money for food, for healthcare, and the like. And I think that one of the big issues we have to deal with in our movement is, how do we treat people in the military, and how do we treat veterans? And this was something that I learned really the hard way. I was a graduate student and in the reserves, and I went to go work at a leftist bookstore in Boston. And, to volunteer, not even to work, to volunteer my time, because I was still, very much politically engaged, and I wanted to be involved with community organizing, and they wouldn't have me. They wouldn't have me because of the fact that I was involved in the military, that I was a reservist. And I said, I'm just volunteering at a bookstore. It's not like we're planning some revolutionary movement here or something. I'm volunteering in the community. But they wouldn't have me. And they called me all sorts of names, even though I had never done anything. I'd never been deployed. I'd never fired a gun at innocent Afghans, innocent Iraqis, or any other peoples in the global South where the US empire is operating. I simply was trying to pay for my education and to try to, provide. And it quickly taught me that a lot of people don't really understand what people are going through who are in the military, what veterans are going through, who have even changed their mind. There's a lot of good veterans who are members of our movement, and that's a fact. And whether people want to disparage that or people want to call them all sorts of names, I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong. You look at the good work done by Veterans for Peace, right? You look at the good work done by many, many comrades in different political parties on the left, in Party for Socialism and Liberation, in Party of Communist USA, in the Communist Party USA, in various parties. You look at what they are doing. They're doing very good work, but the problem is that there's a tendency to move towards the extreme of burn the American flag, death to America, spelled with the 3 Ks. Anybody who is in the military is somehow an imperialist warmonger, and that's simply not true. There are many people, black, brown, indigenous, women, who are in the military because they have no alternative, because this society has not provided them with any alternatives, because the ability to advance in certain areas of this country are just non-existent. And it's really wrong. It's elitist to think that everybody has these same opportunities as some people who are in the ivory tower have. It is. And we have to call it out. And so one of the things that I've really been fascinated about and really taken to heart is in my travels to the areas under assault by empire, in my travels to Venezuela, in my travels to Cuba, in my travels to China, in my travels to Syria, to the DPRK, one thing I learned was we hate the American government, but we love the American people. Everybody told me that. Everybody. Even their leaders say that. Even Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran says that. When we say death to America, we say death to the American empire. When we say death to America, we say death to the American government, but not to the people. The people are also hostage to the system. The people didn't do anything wrong. It's not like the people are sitting around a big table with in a smoke-filled room making decisions at that nice oak table. No, of course not. They're suffering too. Of course, everybody knows that. Everybody around the world can see the suffering on our streets, the poverty, the hunger, the homelessness. So when I travel to these places and people say, "Oh, you're American? We love you, but we hate your government." It's true. It's true, and we have to understand that. We have to understand that they too know the history of the United States, and of the United States that was full of progressive forces, socialists, communists, union organizers, anti-war activists, people fighting for human rights, people fighting for indigenous rights, black rights, for women's rights, all across the board. They know that. And so I think that it does a great disservice to our movement, to our political project, and really, if we are serious to taking power, if we're going to disparage everybody who has the red flag with an American flag, everybody who has a July 4th cookout, everybody who's involved with their community and goes to their local fair, everybody who goes and doesn't disparage their neighbors for having an American flag, I think we really have to realize that our movement is so small, and there are hundreds of millions of Americans who are happy to be here, who are happy to be Americans, who are happy to be in this country, and who don't want civil war, who don't want violent revolution, who don't want chaos in the streets. When I ran for Congress and you speak to people and they're like, oh, communists, like it's like black bloc coming. I said, no, I live in the community. I farm. I have kids, have a family. I don't want to see violence. I'm not a nihilist. I'm not somebody who wants violence everywhere. I might have thought that way for a period in my life, but I grew out of it. I grew out of it because I got immersed in work. I got immersed in a community. I got immersed with a family. You know, when you start to see these things, you realize nobody wants war. And most of all, I saw war firsthand overseas for 9 months, not in the US military, but when I went to Syria. So when you see that up close and personal, you don't wish it upon anybody. Only a sociopath would wish that upon people. This is something that really has to be, we have to dissociate it from our movement. We have to really push it away. It's not something that we want. Sure, do we support armed struggle in the global south against empire? Sure, of course. That's their right. That's their self-determination. But here at home, do I wish for a civil war between right wing, left wing, between Trump supporters and other? No, of course not. Why would I support that? Why would I want that? I want our communities to have dignity. I want our communities to have a better future. I want our communities to build and to have good transportation, good healthcare, good medical care, good education, good childcare. Why can't we have all that stuff? You know? And so one of the things that we have to recognize is that we can be proud of the country we live in without being proud of all of its history, with recognizing that the United States has done tremendous evil in the world. But here at home, communists and socialists, union activists, people fighting have done tremendous good as well. They've sacrificed themselves and their communities for a better tomorrow for the people in the United States. And the people, and when I say the people of the United States, I include undocumented, I include people who are not officially Americans with an ID, but people within the borders who want to have dignity, who want to be respected. And I think one of the big things is, if we want to truly be patriotic, if we want to take a patriotism, which, by the way, every other socialist movement around the world is patriotic. Every other socialist movement around the world proudly waves their party flag or their revolutionary flag with their national flag, right? That's just a reality. That's a true thing that I've seen. For example, in Greece, where I'm also a citizen of Greece. When I go to Greece and I see the Communist Party has the Communist Party flag and the Greek flag, even though the Greek flag is a member state of NATO, a member state of the European Union, has done, has been involved in the imperialist wars. They still say our Greece is not that, right? Just like we can say our America is not that. The United States that we want is not that. The United States that we want is a country that takes care of its people, that takes care of people around the world, that is focused on building a better future for the many, not the few. Because everybody knows, most people in the military know, most Americans know, they're getting fucked. And the real people who are doing it are the elites. The real people who are doing it are the capitalist class that rules and controls everything, the 1%. It's true. Most people think they know. Who doesn't know that? It's a reality. If you look at the polling and the data, everybody knows that they're getting the short end of the stick. Everybody knows. The thing is, how do you go to them and tell them, let's build something better? I'm guarantee you're not going to get to them by burning the American flag. You're not going to get to them by yelling and calling them fascists. You're not going to get to them by telling them to destroy the traditional family. You're not going to get to them by telling them to stop eating meat and stop farming animals and stop doing X, Y, and Z. These are bad tactics. Never mind, they're bad ideologically on the ground level. We can have differences of opinions. I'm not saying that people who are vegan or vegetarian are bad. People who don't like, X, Y, and Z are bad. What I'm saying is simply, we have to understand that there are a basic set of principles that we have, and there is a basic strategy for what we want if we were to take power. And so when I ran for Congress and in my organizing here, I speak a lot about the wars and the empire. We don't want an empire anymore. When I celebrate July 4th, I celebrate an anti-imperialist July 4th. That's what I celebrate. And people who come to the house, that's what we focus on. We focus on the US history that speaks about against empire, in solidarity with revolutionary struggles in those early years of the Republic. One thing has to be laid out here. US history is not monolithic. The founding fathers and founding mothers are not monolithic or homogenous. There was a lot of disagreement amongst them all about what this republic would look like. Some lean much more towards a strong central authority. Others lean much more towards a people's republic to its fullest extent. When you think about people like Thomas Paine, who even went after George Washington and said some of the most horrible things about him. The people who had this revolutionary struggle were not at all in agreement about everything. And so when we look to American history and we say, what are the aspects that we connect with? What are the aspects that we want to bring out, that we want to share with the people in our community? Those are the things that we should bring out. The fact that there was always a trajectory towards people's power. There was always a trajectory towards taking power from the elite and bringing it down. Giving power to workers, giving power to farmers, giving power, freeing slaves. when people talk about all the founding fathers were for slavery, it's not true. There were some that were completely abolitionists and that wanted to end slavery. There was brutal disagreements in the United States. So when you look at this and you speak about being patriotic as a socialist or as a communist is being patriotic about these aspects of American history, about the labor movement, about the struggles of everyday working class Americans fighting for a better future. That's what we're aiming towards. It's not about being patriotic for the wars. We're against the wars. It's not about being patriotic for the empire. We're against the empire. But we will not cede what the United States is in our dreams and what it should be to the right wing or to people who want to take that and do what they want with it. No, we'll take it back and we'll try to show a better future for everyone. So when people know that I am a communist, that I'm a veteran, that I served in the military, and I tell them my frustrations with the empire, my frustrations and my hatred for what this country has done abroad, people listen. People listen because I'm not out there burning the American flag. It doesn't help. It doesn't do anything. It alienates people. But when I sit down with people in my community, more often than not, people agree with me, even on all sides of the political spectrum. Of course, they agree. They know that their treasure is being siphoned away by corporations, is being taken by military-industrial complex. They know this to be a reality. But the hardest part of going out there and doing this work is talking to people, is getting in the ditches, is really getting into our communities. It's not being in echo chambers where you fight about theory, where you fight about the most, the smallest minutia of history. It's about going and talking to the real workers out there. It's about going and talking to the real farmers and saying, what's going on? This is what we want to do. This is how we want to help. And you provide hope. You provide a vision for a better future. You provide a vision for their families, for their communities. And so I think one of the big things that I want to end on is our movement has to be a movement that embraces the revolutionary and liberatory aspects of U.S. history. One of the most important instances of my travels in Cuba came when I went to the University of Havana, where I had given a lecture and was invited to a conference, and went to the Department of Philosophy, which also has Marxist philosophy in it. And as I was walking up the stairs, I saw a huge bust of Abraham Lincoln. And I thought to myself, wow, here in Cuba, in the midst of a revolutionary society that has been, under siege, under a brutal genocidal blockade for all these decades, and they have a massive bust of Abraham Lincoln. So I looked to one of the most distinguished professors who was with me, and I asked, why do you have Lincoln here? And they said, why wouldn't we have Lincoln? Lincoln was an idol for all of Latin America after freeing of the slaves, was such an important figure in the history of abolition globally. And I thought to myself, of all the fighting that I had with activists at home and comrades and former comrades who were saying, was a racist, was X, was Y, was Z. And I thought to myself, even here in communist Cuba, with the socialist system that they have, they still look to Lincoln as someone who should be idolized, as somebody who we should be proud of. And that really struck home for me. It struck home because people outside of the United States were even more proud of aspects of U.S. history than many comrades within the United States who were trying to organize in their communities. And I thought that was such an important lesson to take home. And another important lesson that I've learned over time was every time I would go to one of these countries whose systems I supported, to the socialists, the actually existing socialist states, to the countries that were resisting empire, everybody would say, why did you come here? What, do you want to stay here? What, do you want to build a home here? We did our work. The time has come for you to go home and do your work. Don't just come and live off of us and leech off of us. Go home and change the empire. Go home and bring it down. Go home and change, because if you change the core everything falls apart. The whole imperial structure falls apart. You would have transformed society and the world, and you would have done the greatest service there, not here, not coming to our place where we've struggled and sacrificed so much, but going to the country where you were born. Even though you might not agree with everything, doesn't matter. It's still your home. You can't change it, right? I can't change the fact that I was born in the United States, even even though my parents weren't. But the one thing that all of these years in the movement have taught me is that for so long we have been hijacked by elements who don't really want to take power, who don't really want to change how things are, who don't really want to do the business of communities, of being in the communities and of organizing, to be serious political actors and political transformers of the system. They don't. What they are interested in is they're interested in maintaining their elite place as vocal activists and vocal people in the movement, but not really doing the real work that comes from meeting people day to day, by meeting people of opposite views, and by really engaging in those communities. That's what we have to be doing. And as somebody who is active in my community, and as somebody who is openly communist, openly advocating for socialism, that's one of the things that I think is crucially important. Even to people who have a Trump sign, even to people who are right wing, left wing, up, down, right, it doesn't matter. The point is, you have to speak to your neighbors, you have to speak in your community, you have to speak of a vision for a better tomorrow. And that's what I hope that we can do here. That's what I continue to hope can be built upon for a real socialist United States. One day, if we are serious about taking power, if we are serious about being elected, if we are serious about leading communities, that comes with being serious, dedicated, principled leaders in our communities, which ultimately means wrestling with these issues and saying, yes, I can be patriotic, because patriotism means a workers' state. Patriotism means fighting for everyday families, everyday workers, everyday farmers, for the trucker, for the person picking, blueberries or apples or oranges. It means for the people who are struggling on the margins, for the people who have no hope. It means building a better future. That's the patriotism that I want. That's the patriotism that I believe in. That's the America that I want. It's not an America of war and chaos and destruction and, Mad Max style. That's not the America I want. The America I want is a society that cares for everybody, a society that cares for everybody outside of its borders as well, a society that doesn't infringe on other people's sovereignty and self-determination, but a society dedicated towards the many, not the few. Thank you very much.
Powerful statement, Comrade Chris. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Comrade Pella. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Comrade Pella. Some of you might know me. Those who don't know me, well, how can I explain it? I more or less came of age 10 years ago during the height of Occupy Wall Street, but I didn't always start off that way. I was in high school. I was kind of one of those crazy Bush neocon types, and took a lot of hard lessons and a lot of unlearning to get to where I am today. But for the meantime, right now I am a unemployed but employed tour guide. By unemployed meaning that I'm unemployed in the respect that I'm not doing tours full time of New York City because of COVID mitigation policies. But I am employed working in the bowels of retail hell. So, yeah, and that's, I would like my old job back. So, I've been very busy the past few days with the campaign that I started called Bring Back the Guides, which is raising the issue of the fact that all of our colleagues who work the tour bus circuit were let go. And the big tour buses were not, they kept their operations running because they're effectively giant billboards, but they automated the human element. And when you work in New York City, you have to be a licensed tour guide. You got to know your stuff. They just don't let anybody become a tour guide, and that's why we got the license in the first place, to work the buses and to do our own side projects as well. And I do have a side project. It's called Occupy Tour New York City. I do a tour in Occupy Wall Street. But the current issue is not really about my own thing. It's about fighting toxic tourism within the industry. So next Friday, I'll be back in Times Square doing what I did yesterday, which is hold up a sign and do some outreach and inform tourists not to patronize big tour bus companies that do not use live tour guides, because it's the live tour guides that really make New York City New York City. We tell you, we deter accidents, tell tourists, to sit down when the traffic lamp is coming or when a low branch is coming. We inform tourists not to get suckered by con artists. We inform tourists about, local businesses, not community killing business chains. We provide an integral service to the city, and such to an extent where a pre-recorded tour cannot replace us, because a pre-recorded tour is not us. It's not updated, and it has no human element whatsoever. So I ask those of you who are watching this to support my campaign. And if you know anybody who's going on vacation, you tell them do not patronize tour bus companies, or if they do, you leave negative reviews on the tour bus companies and demand that they bring tour guides back. And that's my campaign, more or less. But the main point of tonight, why I'm speaking tonight, is to give a talk about Thomas Paine. So, Thomas Paine. I will tell you right now, if there's any like philosopher who was chiefly behind my philosophical evolution, it was Thomas Paine. When I started heavy reading back when I was a security guard in those days, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, I did a lot of reading overnight because I had nothing else better to do. What I was going to do, sit and play video games? I was going to read. So I decided to read, the works of the founding fathers. Okay, whatever. But then after I read the Federalist Papers, I came across Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine spoke to me in ways that few other people from that era spoke to me. There's a quote I would like to read from Thomas Paine. And this may be this quote here was a shock to my system, because this is a founding father talking about something that the founders weren't really talking about. In fact, didn't even embrace. So this is from his book, Agrarian Justice. This is volume 13, number 2. Okay, there we go. The present state of civilization is as odious as it is unjust. The contrast of affluence and wretchedness continually meeting and offending the eye is like dead and living bodies chained together. Man did not make the earth, and though he had a natural right to occupy it, he had no right to locate his property in perpetuity, any part of it. Neither did the creator of the earth open a land office from whence the first title deeds should issue. Thus, every proprietor, therefore, of cultivated lands owes to the community a ground rent, for I know of no better term to express the idea. Each individual attaining the age of 21 should receive the sum of 15 pounds sterling as compensation in part for the loss of his or her natural inheritance by the introduction of land property, and the sum of 10 pounds per annum during life to every person now living of the age of 50 years, and to all others as they shall arrive at that age. Now, think about that. This is Thomas Paine writing this, 50, 60 years before Karl Marx was even born. All right. So the way I look at it, Thomas Paine was a proto-socialist. And Thomas Paine, if we're going to bring back the term of founding fathers, it really should be founding father, because more than Jefferson, more than Adams, more than Washington, more than any of those, slave owning, white landed gentry in the Continental Congress, it was Thomas Paine who made the case for American independence by writing Common Sense, which sold about 500,000 copies back in 1776. Now, if we're going to equate that to like the current population, that would be like Thomas Paine selling 20 million copies today. Separate from the Holy Bible, Common Sense is the greatest best-selling book in American history. And it made the case that we should not be, in servitude toward a foreign power, toward a monarch, which is still prevalent today, albeit not so much directly through militarism, but indirectly through finance and banking. They are still around. So Thomas Paine made the argument that we should have nothing to do with Great Britain and nothing to do with aristocratic bankers whatsoever. It was his vision of the American Revolution that, this was to be a country that treated all peoples equally with respect. In fact, Thomas Paine was adamantly anti-slavery. He was, in fact, when he died, only 6 people attended his funeral, and all 6 of those people were African American. That's how much they respected Thomas Paine. Yes, Thomas Paine also was a force of philosophy relative to the French Revolution. He wrote a pamphlet called Rights of Man, which defended the revolution and justified it. And the French Revolution, you look at that, what happened in France? Well, the word spreads to Haiti, of course. Haiti's in the news these days, unfortunately so, but it is what it is. And the people in Haiti who were mostly enslaved of African descent looked at France and like, whoa, look at those people rising up against the crown. Hey, let us rise up against the same aristocratic interests that are enslaving us. And guess what happened? That's exactly what happened. Haitians overthrew the French. And, it created a contagion of revolution throughout the Caribbean. So, because if you go further into the future, I'm sure the Haitian Revolution more or less also partially inspired the Cuban Revolution. It's one thing after another. And we're going to go back to Europe. You had the Napoleonic Wars against the monarchy. The Napoleonic Wars against the monarchy, and now all the monarchs of Europe are threatened by Napoleon, and they're threatened by the French Revolution, and they're threatened by the proletariat and Luton proletariat at the time rising up against the landed interests, and this would lead to other revolutions throughout Europe. And then, that would inspire Hegel, and Hegel would inspire Marx, and Marx would inspire Lenin, and so on and so forth. But that all goes back to Thomas Paine, because he was the one that said, yeah, we're not going to be under the thumb of monarchs and landed interests. And really, Thomas Paine gets like no love from anybody like on the mainstream left. They just clump him in with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Hell no. Thomas Paine was no George Washington and no Thomas Jefferson. In fact, Thomas Jefferson more or less plagiarized Thomas Paine, who was just a proletarian son of a shoemaker from England who came to the United States and said, well, yeah, screw the crown. The crown oppressed my family, and the crown is oppressing us, and let's throw them off, cut them off. And, fast forward to today, And unfortunately, we have a lot of the same interests are still corrupting, the United States. The same aristocratic interests. I mean, how many dynasties do we have in our political system these days? We got the Kennedy family, we got the Bush family. Who knows? We might have the Trump family coming. Hopefully not. But the dynasties are still here, and they're still attached to Wall Street, and Wall Street is still attached to London bankers via central banking and IMF, and it's still going to the same people that we declared our independence from back in 1776. So these people at the top are the enemies. It's not your fellow American living in a trailer park out in West Virginia. It's the people of Wall Street that's screwing everything up. And another thing that we have to look at, it's how the left is going, how the left is presenting itself, at least the mainstream left, how it's presenting itself these days as in like being, against just regular people because they're not as they're not on the up and up with academia's social beliefs. Okay. To be left, it's more than getting being involved in some nonsensical culture war. To be left, you got to be anti-imperialist, and you got to be anti-banker, like Thomas Paine was. So yes, we need to get back to honoring the true founding father of the United States, which is Thomas Paine. We have to put him in a place that is right on par with Karl Marx, because, as I said before, without Thomas Paine, there probably wouldn't be a Karl Marx. And, that's pretty much all I got to say about Thomas Paine at this point.
Thank you, Comrade Pella. We'll continue right along. Next speaker we have is Comrade Kayla. Comrade Kayla, may you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for having me. My name is Kayla Papuche. I am a member of the Party of Communist USA, a worker, a student here, not only just in the belly of the beast, but like the financial capital of the belly of the beast in New York City, where I was born and raised. But, Comrade Pella, that was a really interesting tale about Thomas Paine that you just gave, because I didn't know that. And I feel like in the United States, we often hear jokes, people all over the world, and I think we do it ourselves, where Americans are so dumb, Americans are so ignorant, Americans don't know geography. And, I don't think that any people, any nationality is inherently dumb or not. I think that the American working class has been robbed of education. We've been robbed of knowing different parts of the world. It's so much so that we've been robbed of our own history, like understanding who Thomas Paine was, like understanding the history of International Workers' Day or International Women's Day, and so forth. We've been robbed of this opportunity because an ignorant population is a submissive population. It is the best way to, keep us in the dark, keep us individualistic, non-communitarian, and therefore we'll never question, we'll never rise up. We'll just consume whatever they feed us. And unfortunately, a lot of the American left has also fed into that. They don't want to talk about the history of, the great worker struggles that have happened in this country, the great resistors. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But, I'm a Peruvian American. I'm a Peruvian Haitian American. And so in Peru, what just happened, I'm sure many people have been interested in looking, is, Pedro Castillo, though he hasn't been announced as the president yet, which is, it's been more than a month, and it's definitely some fishy stuff. But one of the platforms that he ran on with the party Peru Libre, which is a Marxist-Leninist Mariategi's party, is the phrase "No más pobres en un país rico," no poor people in a rich country. They don't go around burning the Peruvian flag because the Peruvian flag stole, or Peruvian, the state had stolen their land, had given it to these transnational corporations, that the Peruvian, it just says, Comrade Chris was saying before, the Peruvian state is controlled by the bourgeoisie. They don't do that. When Fujimori, committed his crimes against humanity, against the Peruvian people, slaughtered and sterilized native people, literally tried to wipe out native people so that they wouldn't create a new generation of communists. Peruvians didn't go burn their flag. Peruvians didn't go running around saying death to Peru. What they did, this was instead a symbolism, is that they would wash the flag in front of the embassy, or I'm sorry, the palace, in front of the Congress. They would wash the flag, washing it of its sins, because this is not the representation of the Peruvian people. This is the representation of the Peruvian state, and they are the ones that are staining our nationality. And that is something that the United States really needs to take a lesson on. The United States left. There's a reason why the left is so successful in Peru now, in a country that has been, just recently still traumatized over the civil insurgency, as the right will call it, the terrorism. And this is what people believe in Peru. They see this as terrorism. They're very fearful of the left. I mean, you get somebody like, I don't even know, let's say Joe Biden in Peru will be considered a communist at some point. Like, the media is very, very right wing, and yet you still can have somebody like Pedro Castillo and Peru Libre, a Marxist Leninist Maria Tegui's party that does not hide it, still be successful and win the support of the people. And that is through a love for your people, for fighting for your people, for being among the masses and not sitting on top of them as if I'm better than you, you're wrong, because you've allowed this class to rule over you and to hurt so many people. And another thing that I think that we in the American, working class here, the US left, what we need to take a lesson from as our other South American, comrades, is plurinationality. I think that this is the future for the United States. I've heard it also, plurinationality, be compared to Huey Newton's intercommunalism. But what you see in Bolivia, what they're fighting for in Peru, what exists in Venezuela, is this state that we are a nation of many different nations. And that is something that the United States 100%, I mean, cut and dry, that is us. We are a nation full of so many people. We have a comrade that's Iranian and Greek. I'm Peruvian. There's another one who's Ukrainian here, and so forth, and so many different nationalities. And yet we all still are united by our nationality as Americans, as part of the American working class. And I think that this is something that we need to look forward to, and something that we can try to build, instead of just this, and what I've been calling it, a national nihilism. Oh, don't call me American. Well, leave the country. Go to, when I went to Ukraine, they didn't see me as Peruvian, even though I'm brown. They didn't see me as that. They saw me as American. And, I did benefit from that. I was a little bit safer than, the Roma people who looked very similar to me. I was much safer than them. People wanted to come up and talk to me because I'm American, because I have this passport. You go throughout the world and you will realize how American you are. I mean, I definitely was the kind of person who was like, get me out of this country. I'm out. I hate America. Death to America. And I get to, I took myself on a little birthday trip. I get to Hungary, and I'm like, I'm feeling kind of lonely here. One, I don't speak Hungarian, and the only other English speakers I know here are the Brits. And, like, cool, cool thing for you British people, but I miss my own people, right? And it wasn't like I was missing Peruvians. I was missing Americans to, speak in colloquialisms, to, just be one. Like, we understand each other in a way because we have that similar, background, our nation, our nationality. I have much more in common with somebody like anywhere in Nebraska, because of that, a working class person from Nebraska, than somebody from the other side of the world, even if they're working class too, because we're bound by this our culture. And there is an American culture. It's just the reality. I swear, don't believe me, leave the country, and you're lying if you say that's not real. And so Comrade Chris was pointing out earlier that, I myself was one of these people who thought, let's burn the flag, death to America, like, hate it. And I see that, a lot of leftists take this lesson from people in Iran, from people all over the world who burn the American flag. And, I have no qualms with them. If they want to burn the American flag, hey, that's up to them. Go ahead, burn the flag. I mean, that is the primary contradiction in imperialized countries, is imperialism. And the United States is an occupying force. So if you want to burn the American flag, like, whatever, that's your prerogative. but they're not trying to build socialism in the United States, and it's not their job to build socialism in the United States. It's our job. So for an American person, a person that's living in this country at the least, to be doing that when our job is to be building socialists, if you're going to call yourself a communist and your whole goal is to be building socialism, you can't burn your own flag. What are you doing? You're setting up an unnecessary wall between you and your own people. And as communists, we need to be taking that down. And that is the one of the weirdest things that I see, that a lot of, and I did it myself, because I, like so many others, was virtue signaling. I thought that this is the best way to be the most revolutionary, hate your country. Ooh, look, I'm just like those Iranians. I'm just like those Palestinians. I'm not a Palestinian person. I'm not an Iranian person. And they're building their own struggle, and power to them, and solidarity with you to do that. But my job is to be fighting against the state that's hurting theirs. And so if I'm being counterproductive to building an actual working class movement in my own country, am I actually helping them, or am I just being a clown? Am I just being self-centered? And that's really what it comes down to. And it's so hard to have this conversation with other leftists, because they're just like, no, you just don't get it. Like, oh, we got to be in solidarity. You can be in solidarity with those people through real work, through really trying to change the class dynamic here, the class structure here, the change of the state. Get our troops out of there. And the way that you do that is not out of this place of hatred and contempt for your fellow worker. It is a place of love and wanting to unite and building together. And I'm sorry, but you going to any, non-politicized person and say death to your nationality is really not going to work. I mean, some people might like it. The very vast minority of people are going to like it. And I think that also social media and online culture has really contributed to this stuff, because you'll see people who make these really awful incorrect takes, and maybe it gets a lot of traction, but you think about it, what is it getting? 2,000 retweets, 2,000 likes? This is a country of nearly 400 million people. Okay, that 2,000 stuff, that's not even a city. That's like the block radius over here in Brooklyn. So I'm sorry, we gotta wisen up. And a lot of people will say that this is a failed strategy. American patriotism never worked before. I'm sorry, but your national nihilism hasn't worked ever, hasn't worked anywhere, and has never worked. And it's also like the whole contempt for communism is 20th century, it's 20th century Americanism, or yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know if I would even say that properly at all. But when people refer to this as a failed strategy, I think that they're really removing the context of what it was. It was coming from the popular front that had to be created throughout the entire world against fascism. But our primary fight right now is against neoliberalism. We're talking about not completely two different things, but that strategy isn't the same way that you're trying to make it seem as though it is. And so I think it's a little bit dishonest. And once again, your national nihilism has never worked anywhere, and it hasn't worked in the past 60 years, 70 years. It's not getting us far, so I think we should switch things up a little bit. And another thing that's so, why are we giving patriotism, or really what it is chauvinistic nationalism, because it's not patriotism. They don't love their people, but why are we lending and just conceding pride for your people to the right wing, to the far right, who actually hate their people? They hate American people. They hate the American working class. They want to bring nothing but disaster and dread upon them and the whole world. Why are we conceding something that is very important to people everywhere? Is this sense of belonging to the nation? And we know that the United States is a very nationalistic country, so we need to bring them proletarian patriotism, socialist patriotism, to swing them to the right way. We got to meet the masses where they're at, and we're not going to leave them where we found them. But you can't force yourself upon them. One of the things that's really interesting, I'm going to bring it back to Peru, for example, is I like to have a history of the entire Americas, because I think that we're all, as these American exceptionalists, ultra leftist national nihilists will completely disagree. No, if you actually know the history of Latin America, the United States and Canada are very, very similar to, all the countries in the Americas are very, very similar. Not 100%, but basically parallel. And during the insurgency in Peru, there's a massacre known as Lucanamarca, and this was committed by Sendero Luminoso, also known as the Shining Path. And I'm not going to give you the whole story; it's long. But what really commenced it was when Sendero Luminoso came into Lucanamarca. Lucanamarca was a village that welcomed them in. they were not against Sendero Luminoso. But Sendero Luminoso slowly started to trying to push this cultural revolution on them. They were, oh, this really kicked off when they wanted to have the celebration for the anniversary of their town. So I'm gonna take a sip of water, unnamed water. And they wanted to have a celebration for their town, the anniversary. This is a thing in these small Peruvian towns. And Sendero Luminoso leaders were like, no, you can't do that because that's related to the, bourgeois state culture, blah, blah, blah. And the townspeople were like, sorry, like, who are you? You just got here. We don't know you. We've been doing this for years, for decades. You can't just come here and say, no, you can't do that. And it escalated from there, and it became, this massacre that was absolutely dreadful. Babies were boiled alive. It was awful. All for what? All for what? So I say this whole story to say that you can be, think that you're a revolutionary, but if you're going to be forcing against the grain of what people hold dear to them, instead of working with that and maneuvering with that and bringing them to where they should be, you're going to fail, just like Sendero Luminoso did. And so when we think about Thomas Paine and just the cool history in Abraham Lincoln, people are so shocked. The Cubans would look up to Abraham Lincoln, or that Lenin wrote a letter to American workers and praised the American Revolution, same as Karl Marx. Oh, now this is where they're like, oh, they made a mistake there. They didn't make a mistake in anything else except there. Okay, all right, you know better. But we have real history that we need to promote. There are so many sins of this country. We know that. We know that, and we need to talk about it, sure. But we need to bring it to the right place. And we also need to highlight the revolutionary history that we have in these countries. We need to talk about heroes like Edward Murrow. I almost called him Edmund. Edward Murrow. He stood up to Joseph McCarthy. He stood up to Joseph McCarthy as a journalist, as a broadcast journalist during the heat of the Red Scare. He wasn't a communist. He wasn't a socialist, but he was still a hero. And he helped bring Joseph McCarthy down. There's a school in Brooklyn named after him, and I didn't even know until I was in college what Edward Murrow did. He fought against Joseph McCarthy after kicking this soldier out of the U.S. military because his father was reading a Serbian paper. He said, "This is not right. This is un-American." And he stood up to him, and he, eventually prevailed, and he became a very important person to not only just American journalism, but just, American history. We need to talk about leaders like Huey Newton, Fred Hampton. These are our heroes who stood up for the, Afro-American people and tried to unite the poor working class of this country. We need to look up to the women of this country, the women in New York City, American socialist women who started what is now the international holiday of Working Women's Day. I didn't even know until this year that it was started in my own city. Guys, we have so much beautiful history in this country, so much revolutionary history. The American Revolution was a qualitative change in the world. And, the radicals, because they're not Marxists, the radicals will just reduce it to say it was all about slavery, it was all about genocide. And then the hypocrisy of it all, too. At the same time, American Independence Day is July 4th. Venezuelan Independence Day is July 5th. The South American independence revolutions were inspired by the North American Revolution. You can't ask, but you should read what Simón Bolívar thought of the American Revolution, looked up to them. And, it was also a bourgeois revolution. We celebrate in Peru July 28th. We're going to celebrate it. Venezuela celebrates July 5th. Nicaragua celebrates September 15th, and so forth. And these are socialist countries. I mean, Peru, not yet, but still, these are socialist countries that still celebrate the day that they got their independence from the colonial power, from a qualitative change in history, and especially in our continents. These are and the American Revolution inspired that, inspired the Haitian Revolution, inspired the Latin American independence revolutions. And for us to reduce it to it's just slavery, it was just genocide, this was also a class struggle. And if we're Marxists, we remember that the history of all existing society is a history of class struggle. We should look at it like that. We should look at it like that and interpret that and build it and raise it and have Americans think of it as that as well. But instead, we're just going to, concede it. It was just slavery. It was just genocide. You're, again, putting yourselves up the wall. You're going to go to a barbecue. I know that there's people that do it, hot dogs, and there's some person in the back that everyone's like, who invited them? That's just, going off about how this is all horrible. Setting up a wall unnecessarily, for yourself, between you and the working class. And so I'm not gonna, rant on too long. I feel like we're all saying the very similar things, but I'm just gonna point on to a few things that we need to be revolutionary, and to be revolutionary is to love your people, to have that, revolutionary love. Che Guevara said that he was once jealous of the American worker because we have the greatest fight of all, to build socialism within the belly of the beast. And we need to have a care and love for our people that is not nihilistic, because that's not going to win. It hasn't won for the past 70 years. We need to try socialist patriotism, real socialist patriotism, and do that. We've become this for some reason people think it's great to be this meme, this character of what the right wing paints as the US left, as if like some people just wake up and they're like, okay, what is Ben Shapiro saying how I'm supposed to be? Okay, I'm gonna be like that. Why? Why are we doing that? No, we're regular people. We're your, court employees, we're your street cleaners, sanitation workers, hairdressers. We are regular normal people, and we need to start acting like that, not to act like these caricatures of what the right wing wants us to be. And then you just be like, oh, look, they were right. Look at these crazy kids in Brooklyn burning the American flag, and they're from Ohio, or just what are you doing? What are we doing? We need to snap out of that. And so, again, polar nationality, in my opinion, is the way for not just the United States, but all of the Americas. We need to build, Pan Americanism and revolutionary solidarity within the people of this country and the people outside in, the rest of the world, in imperialized countries. But we need to remember that we have different contradictions that exist in this country than, for say, in an imperialized country. And we need to think about that. We need to stop trying to virtue signal. Stop trying to look the coolest online, as like just as Comrade Chris was saying before, just to have that spotlight on, look at me, I'm doing the work, instead of actually getting that work done among the masses. It's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about anyone here, it's about our nation, everybody that's here. Whether you're American or not, everybody that's here, we need to be building socialism. And the way that we do that is not through national nihilism. It's not through these failed ultra leftist CIA influenced politics that is so popular in the US left. It's about getting back to Marxism, Leninism, and follow a strategy that's worked everywhere in the world. Again, show me where national nihilism has successfully produced a revolution, a socialist revolution. I'm not following that. That doesn't look good. It hasn't worked here. It's not looking good anywhere else. So thank you again for letting me rant for the past, I don't know, 10 minutes. And I'll pass it over back to you, Dust.
Thank you, Comrade Kayla. Always great. So we'll continue on with our keynote speaker, Comrade Michael. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, Dust, and excellent presentation, Kayla. Just a moment as I bring up my presentation. Okay, can everyone see it? Excellent. So, my name is Michael, as Dust said. I'm a Ukrainian American, a lawyer, and a proud communist. And I'm here to present to you Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, and socialism in America. Now, you oftentimes hear the first two topics discussed, but not often at all with the third. So I intend to rectify that situation with this PowerPoint here. And I suppose we can just dive right in. We have the central controversy of Lincoln, if we could call it that. If you hear about Abraham Lincoln lately, most of the time it's couched in conversation about how throughout a substantial period of his life, he had taken the political position and expressed personal opinions that suggest that he was fighting to, quote unquote, preserve the Union, as opposed to explicitly fighting against slavery and the slave system. And that he had said racist things about Black Americans and slaves. But yet, contemporaries of Lincoln who were communists and future communists spoke glowingly of him, endorsed him, supported him politically. In fact, that picture there, that's of a 1939 rally of the Communist Party of the United States of America. And up there, that big side portrait next to portraits of Lenin and Stalin is Lincoln. So what's going on here? Well, the central controversy, as I pointed out, is really who Lincoln was personally. versus his significance in American history. So how do these two things really relate? Well, let's dive right in. And the first person I'm going to look at when investigating this is W.B. Du Bois, an American communist, an eventual CPUSA member, who had written a 1922 essay by the name of Abraham Lincoln and the American Negro. And it covered the personal views of Lincoln and their evolution with the Civil War. And the thing is, what it did is it really wasn't focused on vindicating Lincoln. Rather, its primary focus was his historical role. It attempted to draw a relation between the economic interests of Northern businessmen, or the industrialists, and Southern plantation owners, the planters. It showed how they were, as much as they were connected, they were also in conflict. And W.B. Du Bois made the point that it was unsustainable, and Lincoln was caught in this conflict, and ultimately it would explode in the Civil War. And Lincoln, as this conflict intensified and progressed, his personal views would change alongside that. And to give you an idea, Du Bois begins his essay with this quote: "In most respects, Lincoln's attitude toward Negroes was that of other average white Americans. He did not really know them. He saw black folk from afar as comical, shiftless, and ugly. But Abraham Lincoln was a man of deep sympathy, and he had the rare courage to change his mind as he grew and learned. When as president, he came to know Negroes as men. He dared to treat them as such." So we see this personal change in Lincoln. What's going on here? What type of material, economic, social forces are behind this change? Well, I'm going to put a bookmark in Du Bois and go back to him in a little bit. But for now, we'll look at another prominent American communist, the ever famous William Z. Foster, who in 1951 had published a work titled The Outline Political History of the Americas, and in it he has a small but very detailed section on the Civil War. And here is his insight on this. "The drastic assertion of Southern planter interests at the expense of those of all other sections of the population inflamed and aroused the anti-slavery forces throughout the country. It also brought about sharp class differences in the Democratic Party, which would eventually form its opposition in the form of the Republican Party, which, of course, would host Lincoln. So it seems like a big theme here is the development of this planter class, which came into conflict with the Northern industrialists and the workers and the slaves. So how did this exactly happen? Well, to understand this, you actually have to look back about 80, 90 years prior to the Civil War, all the way back in the late 1700s. And what was happening at the time was a lot of people assumed that slavery, just because it was economically inefficient, because it was so labor intensive, that it would just die out naturally. But then something happened. The cotton gin was invented. So previously, when you had these huge estates filled with slaves, they would harvest the cotton, and then they'd have to pick out all of the seeds from the cotton by hand. Well, the cotton gin did it for you. So all of a sudden, there was this boom in the slave market, in the raw agricultural market, in the land market, and the slave estates were not only resuscitated, but they vastly expanded across the late 18th century and heading into the mid-19th. And what had happened is that industry also expanded heavily, particularly in the northern United States and England. Now, why? It's because they would take all of this raw cotton and using textile manufacturers, turn it into textiles, various fabrics and such. And so you see this interconnection between Southern planter interests and the Northern industrialists. However, there were several conflicts packed into here. One, there was a big drive for the Southern planters to basically assert a monopoly over the economy. They actually ended up in conflict with the industrialists, and I said we will return to Du Bois in a bit. So here I'm going to read you a quote from him that expands on Lincoln's role in this conflict. Abraham Lincoln called upon the growing commercial power of the North and the desire of the white workers for free land without the competition of black labor to volunteer to subdue Southern secession. He found himself at a tremendous disadvantage because Southern leaders had had military training and Northern leaders had not, so that it was nearly impossible to get generals for the Northern armies. Lincoln agreed to use Negroes as laborers, stevedores, and guards. He became ready to admit that without the work of Negroes as spies, laborers, and armed guards, the North could not win the war. As the fighting increased in intensity and the tremendous cost of its war and the human suffering began to mount, Lincoln easily was brought to concede that the emancipation of slaves was the only way to stop the fighting and to maintain the union of power, which was to be the United States. So basically, the Southern planters were so aggressive, so vicious in maintaining this and expanding this slave regime, they ironically came into conflict with those that they were connected to, the Northern industrialists. And they also came into conflict with the workers and, of course, the slaves. We'll expand on this a bit more later, but for now, to give you an idea of exactly what the victory in the Civil War of the North meant for the South, we really see, and Foster writes about this, we really see an assertion of these industrial interests and the industrialization of the United States and expansion of industrial capital. So this is Foster writing in 1951, and he talks about the post-war transformation of the South. He says, the Morgan Associates controlled the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, Virginia Bridge Company, Commonwealth and Southern Company, Southern Railroad, Universal Atlas Cement Company, and a host of other big plants and concerns in the South. Of course, all this industrialization of the United States would be impossible if simply the Southern planters had their way. And now we're talking about this huge expansion of industrial capital. Obviously, with a huge expansion of industrial capital, you also have a big development of the industrial working class. So this type of conflict attracted several notable individuals in Europe. One we might recognize, Karl Marx and his International Workingmen's Association, otherwise known as the First International. And it was a gathering of various European revolutionaries. Some were socialists, some were nationalists, some were anarchists. And they wrote an address to Abraham Lincoln about the Civil War. And the letter echoes the conclusions of Du Bois and Foster. It emphasized the importance of defeating the Confederate gentry, and it declared solidarity between the working class of Europe and the struggle to defeat slavery in the United States. It saw a eventual defeat of slavery as a necessary stepping stone for historical progress and the eventual emancipation of all workers. Here's a quote from it to give you a better idea. While the working men allowed slavery to defile their own republic, while before the Negro mastered and sold without his concurrence, they boasted it the highest prerogative of the white-skinned laborer to sell himself and choose his own master. They were unable to attain the true freedom of labor or to support their European brethren in their struggle for emancipation, but this barrier to progress has been swept off by the Red Sea of civil war. So there was this continuity of history. So the Civil War was a stepping stone for the eventual emancipation of the whole working class, and the freedom of the slaves was necessary for that. And the Civil War itself was the continuity of the first American Revolution, which was the 13 colonies breaking itself off from Britain. So it was, and the outcome of the Civil War and the path that America was being set upon was essential for the fate of the international working class. And you may be wondering what stirred up all of these European thinkers and what connection this might have on to the events in mid-19th century America. Well, there was this big event in Germany that was actually very, very highly connected with what had happened during the Civil War and beforehand, this alliance between workers and the industrial North in order to bring about the end of slavery. And that was the 1848 German Revolution. And the 1848 German Revolution, called Germany, for context, wasn't really the Germany you understand today. It wasn't one state. It was a whole bunch of tiny principalities, bishoprics, little feudal kingdoms, and for various reasons, people of many different sectors of class society wanted to get rid of this feudal system. And so they united together to collapse it. And to give you an idea of how broad this coalition was, that center flag right there, you see that that German flag with the 3 horizontal stripes, that was the section of 1848 revolutionaries that wanted a united Germany with a monarch at the head. Well, that right flag, that flag with vertical stripes, that was a section of 1848 revolutionaries that wanted a united German republic. So you had these Republicans, these monarchists, and of course, communists, socialists, radicals, all coming together to end feudalism in Germany. And naturally, Karl Marx was involved. And heading up into 1848, he was part of this organization called the Young Hegelians. And basically, they were this organization of intellectuals who studied the works of Georg Hegel, a philosopher, and they wanted to apply what he said to the situation in Germany to come up with these radical solutions. And they published a newspaper called Die Rheinische Zeitung, which is the Rhinish newspaper. And Karl Marx was a leading collaborator and later editor, and it proved to be quite influential with a number of people within the Prussian, Prussia was a major kingdom in Germany at the time. It proved to be influential with several Prussian officers, and one in particular was a talented certain young artillery lieutenant by the name of Josef Weidemeyer. Who was Josef Weidemeyer? Well, he took well to Marx's ideas, and he became a socialist. So to give you an idea of what he believed in and how he perceived events in Germany, this is him talking about the topic of free trade. So if you remember earlier, I had said Germany was divided into all of these little petty kingdoms. And the problem is, if you wanted to ship one good from one end of Germany to the other, you passed through all of these different kingdoms and you had to pay a tariff across every single border. And this made accumulating capital quite difficult for the bourgeoisie. So naturally, they were against that aspect of the feudal order. And so this is Josef Weidemeyer commenting on it. They, that is the business leaders, desire free competition as they desire freedom of the press. They desire it for themselves, not against themselves. They want to exploit, but not be exploited. So here we have this working class perspective. Yes, the bourgeoisie want free trade, but they also wanted to secure the position as an exploiter. Interesting, right? Well, how is this related to America? Well, in 1848, the German Revolution was crushed, and many who were part of the Communist League had to get out of the place. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels ran to England. A whole bunch of other people left to other places. But Weidemeyer, loyal soldier that he is, stayed, and he attempted to organize relief amongst those who both remained within Germany and who were fleeing abroad. He also attempted to connect all of these disparate radical elements of 1848 and band them together and basically reignite a workers' movement. But unfortunately, Weidemeyer could really only do this for 3 years until he had to flee to Switzerland because the Prussian government was after him. And at that point, he had to decide where to go from there to pursue the cause of the international working class. And so we went into correspondence with Marx and Engels. And he had 3 options. 1, he could stay in Switzerland, but there was no work to be found, so he could not sustain himself. 2, he could go to England and live with Marx and Engels, but that would kind of just be a wasted opportunity. They were already there in England. And the 3rd option was America, in New York. Ooh. So Weidemeyer now engaged in correspondence with Marx and Engels on the question of leaving for America. Each of them carefully weighed the pros and cons of the undertaking. Above all, they discussed what role America could play in advancing the cause of labor and social progress, since the victory of the counter-revolution in Europe had made work immeasurably more difficult. Now, Marx and Engels had mixed reactions. Marx was actually more enthusiastic about this idea because Marx and Engels were connected to a paper in New York called the New York Tribune, and they published articles through it. So they figured, okay, Wedemeyer can go down to New York, he can serve as a liaison between us and the Tribune, and on top of that, he can connect with all of the other Germans who had fled from 1848 to the USA, and he can attempt to organize the workers' movement there. Great. Engels was a bit more skeptical about the prospect, and this is what he had to say. Your greatest handicap will be that the available Germans who are worth anything become easily Americanized and give up any thought of returning. Then too, we must consider the special conditions of America, the ease with which the overflow population settles on the land, the necessarily increasing tempo of the country's prosperity, which makes people consider bourgeois conditions as beau idéal, beautiful ideal. So keep that Engels quote in the back of your head, because specifically he calls it the greatest handicap. This will come up many times later, and it turns out to be prophetic for Wedemeyer. But anyway, in 1851, the decision was made. Wedemeyer was heading off to the USA. And just a moment as I drink my water. I was going to make an unnamed water beverage joke, but Kayla already stole it from me. Anyway, continuing, to give you an idea of how many German immigrants exactly were coming over, it had reached an all-time high after 1848, over 100,000 in a single year. And by the 1850s, when Wedemeyer had come over, that was over 200,000 yearly. So a lot were pouring into the United States, and a lot of them were radicals. Many of them carried the spirit of 48 with them, Wedemeyer, of course, being a very notable one. And they all formed all of these different workers' associations, social groups, organizations for land reform in the United States, unions, a whole bunch of things that could be broadly described as a workers' movement within the United States. And Wedemeyer wasted no time organizing with them. In fact, to give you an example, here is a quote from the National Reformers Association, which was filled with such German immigrants. Resolved, we declare solemnly that we have no country but the earth, that all men have an equal right to live upon it. Resolved, we call ourselves Americans and have no other interests than those of the American people, because America is the asylum of the oppressed everywhere, and because the interest of the American people is the interest of the whole human race. Resolved, we recognize in the national reformers our fellow laborers in the cause of progress as pioneers of a better future, as the advocates of the cause of the oppressed children of industry, and as the only true democracy of the land. So these types of ideas were floating around all of these different associations of German immigrants, workers. And one big concern for them, remember that Engels quote, was land. A lot of them were looking for land to settle upon, and a lot of these different proto-socialist organizations, socialist utopian organizations that sought to build a more egalitarian society, they frequently talked about how, well, to solve the ills of capitalism, what we need is land. We need free land available to us. Everybody should be given land, and then we can sustain ourselves on our own little plots, and so on and so forth. Now, Wedemeyer had a bit more of a specific and complex critique of capitalism, but as you can see, acquiring this free land was of concern. And if you could connect back to what we had said earlier, slave estates, which rely on harvesting tons of this raw agricultural material, they're very, very land hungry. So when the USA establishes a new territory and there's a question of whether slave estates could come in or not, naturally, the issue of slavery would pop up for these workers' associations. And with that, we have the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed and allowed slaveholders to freely enter the Kansas and Nebraska territories. And what this effectively did with how land hungry the slave estates were is that they prevented free labor and migration from other states. so the workers' movement voiced their opposition. Demonstrations across the USA followed, including in major cities like Chicago and New York. So Weidemeier wasted no time getting involved in this, and to Weidemeier, it was clear that the Kansas-Nebraska bill and the wave of protest it unleashed were signs of a political development which the labor movement could not ignore. Of course, there were divisions, but keep in mind that Engels' quote from earlier, it was supposedly supposed to be Weidemeier's greatest handicap, this emphasis on land. But it turned out to actually be a political asset in organizing a fight against the slave system in the USA. So about these divisions, we had mentioned how they really had this idea that if you simply gave land, then everything would be fine, and we can fight against capitalism that way by making all of this available to workers. Well, Weidemeier's critique was, as I said, more complex. And specifically, he connected slavery to the stifling of economic prosperity. Here's what he had to say about it. Slavery excludes any industrial development as well as any scientific and industrial progress in agriculture, and is based solely on the production of staples, using human labor power in its crudest form and utilizing the crudest tools. So, the rapid expansion of slavery followed the invention of the contingent. This increased the importance of cotton exports for U.S. trade. To review, this created immense speculation and glut in the slave, agricultural, and land markets of the USA, and this laid the basis for the conflict in the Civil War. So what was the way out? The abolishment of slavery and the industrialization of the USA to increase the common prosperity of the working class in America and across the whole world. Where black labor was in bondage, white labor could not truly be free. So, naturally, Weidemeier found an ally, the Republican Party, and Lincoln. So German Americans convened a Congress on May 14th to 15th in 1860 in Chicago to put forward demands at the Republican National Convention. And ultimately, they endorsed Abraham Lincoln. This is what they had to say. We firmly adhere to the principles of the Republican Party as they were laid down in the Philadelphia Platform of 1856. We desire that they be applied in a sense most hostile to slavery. And let us not forget, workers had their direct material circumstances worsened by the existence of slavery. Here's an example. This is an address to the Republican Germans in Williamsburg from the Tailors Union there. German fellow citizens, stand by Lincoln and freedom. The lackeys of the slave power tell you that there is so little work now because the firms that work in the clothing industry for the South are fearful of the election of Lincoln. They lie. Some of them are withholding work because they expect less markets this year and do not wish to put in large stocks of supplies for the bad harvest in the South has restricted trade. So here we have, because of the existence of these large slave estates, the direct worsening of conditions for workers. They had lower wages, they had unstable employment, and they had a less certain economic future. So that's why Weidemeier sought alliances with the Republican Party and between all the American workers' movement to overthrow the system. And that's why communists later on would regard what happened in 1861 to 1865 as a revolution. Here's what William Z. Foster has to say about it. The overthrow of the slave owner's rule was a revolution, for it basically altered the economy of the nation and transferred political power from one class to another. It was also a bourgeois revolution because it shattered the feudalistic planter regime and made industrial capitalism dominant. And finally, it was a bourgeois democratic revolution because control in its main drive was the abolition of slavery, and also because the Negro people, the small farmers, and the working class were decisive elements in carrying the Civil War through to victory. So you look at Lincoln's personal development, and you can see how this makes sense. Sure, at first he says that it's a fight to preserve the Union, but as he has to align himself with this coalition of broad progressive forces to end slavery, his position, by necessity, becomes more firmly anti-slavery. So overall, what had happened in the Civil War and the victory of the North was progressive. And communists were, of course, involved with it. And now, I'd like to draw a parallel to today. remember Engels's letter to Wedemeyer, your greatest handicap. This thing that Engels had originally perceived as perhaps an issue, a problem, Wedemeyer had to work through with the German Americans, actually turned out to be an asset. Their desire for free land ran directly contrary to the slave system. So, did Wedemeyer, when he encountered all these different German workers' association saying all this stuff about free land, did he dismiss them and say, "No, that won't destroy capitalism, you fool"? And did he sit in his own small, isolated organization and not want to work with anyone? No. When he saw Lincoln, did he dismiss him as a representative of the northern industrial capitalists and not a true proletarian, and therefore not deserving of being worked with? No. He endorsed the Republican Party. He endorsed Lincoln. When he looked at this broad conflict between the southern planters and the northern industrialists, did he simply brush it off as a fight within the working class? And no, our hands off, the workers' movement needs no part in it. No, not at all. And the participation of the workers' movement turned out to be instrumental to ending slavery in the United States and the victory of the North. So what does that mean to today? There's currently a conflict going on among different sections of the ruling class. And we, as communists, have to pay attention to how working people react to it. And we have to look at where we can build points of solidarity. And part of that means, and it's a big part, is developing a genuinely patriotic socialism. Is presenting to people that you can work with them, that you love the country, and that you want to see it improve. If you huddle yourself into your own small isolated sect and then say American workers are reactionary, and no, we don't want to take part in any sort of fight in the ruling class and don't want to make any sort of strategic alliances because ultimately we'll just serve the capitalists or whatever. What ends up happening is that you don't do the necessary political work for the eventual emancipation of the working class. You make no steps forward. So, with that, I thank you all for listening to me, and I'll hand it back to Dust.
Thank you, comrade, for a very thorough and educational presentation. Very inspiring. Lot of food for thought. I think I will start the question and answer section. I wanted to kick off the question and answer section by hearing from our CEO of Center for Political Innovation, author and journalist, Caleb Maupin. The reason why I wanted to ask him a question first, I recommend his presentation. Very beautiful, from the heart, passionate, very powerful speaker. Socialism Will Save America. It is on his YouTube channel, and in that he talks about Superman as a communist, as the embodiment of a patriotic, anti-racist hero, something that we can draw on in pop culture. And he also talks about being one of the few Americans to visit Iran and hear the leader of Iran speak and the transformation that he went through. Comrade Caleb Maupin, could you tell us a little bit more about your position and this story?
Sure. Thanks for asking me about this, Dust. I've told this story many times, but it bears repeating because it was a very pivotal moment in my life. And that was in 2015 when I visited the Islamic Republic of Iran for the third time. And what happened was I actually went on a ship to Yemen to try and deliver humanitarian aid to the people of Yemen with the Red Crescent Society of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we packed up our ship, full of flour, full of medical supplies. There were doctors and surgeons and members of the Iranian parliament. And I was the only American on the ship. There was a German citizen on the ship. There was a French citizen on the ship. And everyone else was an Iranian. And for 13 days, we were on this boat trying to get to Yemen, to a war-torn country, and deliver humanitarian aid with the Red Crescent Society, which is an internationally recognized humanitarian organization. We were trying to reach the port of Hodeidah, which is in Yemen. And it is a crime against humanity to block the delivery of humanitarian aid. But that did not stop the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from bombing the port of Hodeidah 8 times in a single day on the day we were planning to arrive. And they killed a number of dock workers. They killed medical students the following day. They bombed the medical university in Hodeidah and killed a number of medical students. Under these circumstances, we were unable to complete our mission. Now, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel had been telling the world that our ship had weapons on it and that we were trying to deliver weapons to Yemen. However, when we redirected our ship to Djibouti, the African country of Djibouti, the contents of the ship were unloaded, and the UN relief workers saw that the Israelis had been lying, the Saudis had been lying. There was nothing on our ship but medical aid, but flour, but medicine. And this was not a military mission. This was a humanitarian mission. And the Saudis had blocked it. And I understand there was a phone call from what I was told. I cannot confirm this. This is what I was told by my Iranian hosts. There was a phone call in which Javid Zarif, who was the foreign minister of Iran, and John Kerry, who was at that point the Secretary of State, talked about this ship, and that John Kerry was very angry that I was on the ship. And he felt that Iran had, at the time, negotiations were taking place in Geneva for the Iran deal. And John Kerry felt that Iran had been dishonest with him and somehow tricked him by putting an Occupy Wall Street kid on the ship to go to Yemen. So apparently I came up in that phone call, which probably means I'll be spied on by the NSA for the rest of my life. But there you go. So I went back to Iran. And when I got back to Iran, my hosts gave me the opportunity to attend a gathering of Iranians it's every year on the anniversary of the death of Khomeini, who is the founder of the Islamic Republic. There is a gathering at his mausoleum of thousands of people. And the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, gives an annual speech there. And so I went into this auditorium with 20,000 people. The women were on one side, the men were on another side. A lot of the people, most of the people there were seated on the floor. I was kind of seated with like the diplomats from China and from African countries. We had chairs. I had a translator in my ear, and we're just gathering, and it's just a crowd of people there. It was a lot of more working class Iranians, I would say. It wasn't wealthy folks. A lot of working class Iranians, a lot of working class folks from other parts of the Middle East. And I was the only American in the room. And when I went in, they gave me the biggest pat down I've ever had in my life. Being an American going in to see the Supreme Leader, they took my wallet out and they went to see if my credit cards had blades in them, and they felt me up and down, and they took off my shoes, and they took the soles out of my shoes, and they made sure that there was no way I could do anything to harm the Supreme Leader or have any weapons or anything like that. So I got to go into the auditorium, and I'm standing in the back, and the Supreme Leader spoke to the audience. And it's kind of a unique experience, because when the Supreme Leader walked into the room, all of a sudden the energy level in the room just exploded. And I'm in the side with the men, and I see all these grown men just start crying and sobbing and rocking back and forth. And, all the men in the room, not in unison, but at different times, they extend their hands up to the Supreme Leader. And they shout, "The blood in my vessels belongs to the Supreme Leader. The blood in my vessels belongs to the Supreme Leader." And it's this amazing moment. The Supreme Leader only has one arm that he can use. His other arm is paralyzed because of a bombing from the Mujahideen Khalq. So he raises his one hand up in the air, and the audience it's like an extreme reaction. Like, you have to have been in the room. I mean, the energy level is dynamic. I mean, it's something special. So then he spoke to us for about an hour or so. And he talked about the Islamic Revolution of Iran. He talked about the negotiations with the United States. He said that there were two major distortions of Islam. He said there was the westernized Islam that embraces capitalism, and there's also the Wahhabi terrorist Islam of ISIS and Saudi Arabia, and that both of those are distortions of the Islamic faith, and that they in Iran have their revolutionary Islam. He said that they oppose the crimes of ISIS terrorism and the crimes of the American police and the police brutality in the United States, because they are both the same and they are both, something that they would oppose, and the audience applauded for that. And then he pointed out that there was a big controversy in Iran at the time about whether or not they should call America the Great Satan, right? In Iranian and Persian, they call it Shaitan-i-Buzurg, which means the Great Satan. And he said, we do call America the Great Satan, but we're not talking about the American people. We're not talking about the average American people. We are talking about the American system. We're talking about imperialism. We're talking about capitalism. And then after he said that, I was the only American in an audience of 20,000 people standing there who all in unison started pumping their fists and chanting, "Death to America, death to America, death to America." And it was a huge moment for me to be in this audience, this auditorium of 20,000 people chanting "Death to America, death to America." And tears started pouring down my face. And it was a deeply, deeply emotional moment for me. I saw this because I knew that they were not chanting against me or my family. They weren't chanting against my comrades at Occupy Wall Street or my fellow progressive activists. They weren't chanting against the working families that have lost their homes due to the predatory lenders. They weren't chanting to the people who become victims of the prison industrial complex. To the Iranians and to the people of South America, to the people of Asia, to people all over the world, the very name America has become synonymous with predatory capitalism, with war, and with imperialism. And that filled me with outrage, filled me with great outrage, because I know that there is another America. There's the America of Eugene Debs. There's the America of Gus Hall. There's the America of John Brown and Harriet Tubman, the America of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. There's the America of so many progressive people that have stood against the wars, stood for the rights of the oppressed, stood against slavery and Jim Crow segregation, and stood against empire. And that it is our responsibility as people living in the United States to bring forth that other America, to show the other side of the American people. And furthermore, we have a responsibility to take this seriously. If we just want to play and burn the American flag and dress up in costumes and live action role play, that's fine. But we have a very, very serious responsibility. People really die. People are really starving. People are fighting for their lives every day. And the work that we do as communists in the United States is far more important than anyone can imagine, right? If you think about the people of Yemen, right, who I tried to bring medical aid to, these are people in one of the poorest countries in the world, and they have faced off for 5-6 years now against the fourth largest military budget in the world, against airplanes and bombs and drones from the United States. They're Bedouin. They live in tents in the mountains, and they are fighting the biggest army in the world. But yet they are resisting. Why? Because they are fighting for their lives, and they have the support of the people. And they try to say the war in Yemen is all just a conspiracy from Iran. If that was over, it would have been over in a week, or maybe 2 weeks, or a couple months. But the fact that the people of Yemen are resisting so heroically the onslaught from Saudi Arabia, backed by the United States, backed by the British, backed by the Germans and the French. I mean, this is something unheard of in the world, right? But it's a lot like Vietnam. It's a lot like Korea. Mao Zedong, he said that the people of a small country can surely defeat aggression by a big country, but only if they dare to rise and struggle. And that this is a law of history. This is a law of history. And that this system that has become synonymous with America, around the world, this evil system where big monopolies and corporations beat down countries and grind people into poverty. There was a time where some Americans benefited from it, right? There was a time where, you know, where they were bombing Korea, they were bombing Vietnam, and they were carrying out coups in Latin America, and we all got houses and cars and TV sets, and we got our little crumb, and that bought us our silence. We were labor aristocrats. But what they're doing right now is they are systemically eradicating the aristocracy of labor. They have destroyed Pittsburgh. They've destroyed Chicago. They've destroyed Cleveland. They've destroyed so many once prosperous working class neighborhoods. The same thing that these big banks and corporations and international monopolies have been doing to the developing world for hundreds of years, they're now starting to do to places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Ohio and Iowa and Florida, all over this country. And so now is the time we can actually have solidarity. We can break down the American exceptionalist mindset and have the American working people stand arm in arm, black and white, unite and fight, but Americans of all races, all nationalities, all religions, standing in solidarity with the people around the world struggling against imperialism. And I think this is a moment of great opportunity. This is not a moment to say, F the United States, I hate this country, I hate the world, and go hide on the internet. And no, this is a moment to get out of the movement and get to the masses, to have the real ability to reach average Americans. So much potential in this moment. But if we don't do it, if we don't seize the moment, if we don't seize the time, other forces will. Other forces will. And so it is our responsibility to go, as Lenin said, lower and deeper to the real masses, to expose the social imperialists like BreadTube and get to the real masses, you know, and if they may be backward and supporting Trump or supporting, you know, capitalism or not understanding socialism, it's our duty to argue with them and win them to an anti-racist, anti-imperialist, progressive, socialist, and revolutionary position. And let me add, you know, I just feel like reading this because, you know, as much as people around the world have been led to believe that America is totally synonymous with this system, I want to read you what was written by Henry Carey, because Karl Marx called Henry Carey the anti-slavery economist of the United States. He said he was the only economist in America that had any real value. And this is what Henry Carey wrote before the Civil War. He said, there are two systems before the world. One looks to exporting men to occupy desert tracts, the sovereignty of which is obtained by the aid of diplomacy or war. The other, to increasing the value of an immense extent of land by importing men by the millions for their occupation. One looks to the centralization of wealth and power in a great commercial city that shall rival the cities of modern times, which have been and are being supported by the aid of contributions which have exhausted every nation subjected to them. The other to the concentration by aid of which the market shall be made upon the land, by the products of the land, and the farmer and the planter to be enriched. One looks to increasing the necessity of commerce, the other to increasing the power to maintain it. One looks to overworking the Hindu and sinking the rest of the world down to his level, the other to raising the standards of man throughout the world to our level. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism, the other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, and combination of action and civilization. One looks toward universal war, the other toward universal peace. One is the English system, and the other we may be proud to call the American system, for it is the only one ever devised the tendency, which was that of elevating while equalizing the conditions of man throughout the world. And that the very motivation of the American Revolution was the fact that the British Empire very much did not want the United States to economically develop. They wanted the United States to just be a trade hub in their global empire. The British Empire was like the Roman Empire. They controlled the trade routes. They were the global middleman in trade. All roads led to Rome, and all sea routes led to London. And if you wanted to do business on the world market, you had to trade with them. But Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Paine and others said no, that the way you have human progress is by having a national bank that funds industries and promotes science and human development. Now, unfortunately, we know that there was an ugly side to this as well. Developing the United States meant the slaughter of the native people. and it meant a lot of bad things. So, we don't want to totally embrace that. But the American Revolution was rooted in the understanding that human progress can be created, and that this financialization, this global financial system where profits are made by operating as the global middleman as the whole world gets poorer, must be rejected. Let me say this. One thing about the American people is that we are a people that believe in hope and growth, right? We are a people, that's the American dream. They talk about the American dream. You go start a business and you work hard and anyone could be a millionaire. Well, the American dream is bullshit, right? This system is run by ultra rich people. It's rigged. Working people are screwed. But that optimism and that hope and that belief that tomorrow can be better than today, what people around the world call motor mindedness, what the American people are identified with, people from all backgrounds in the United States, are identified with this motor mindedness and this optimism, this hope, this optimism, this go get 'em spirit, this never surrender, this relentlessness that is associated with America. This is what can build socialism. When Anna Louise Strong, the great American journalist, went to the Soviet Union in the 1930s during the Great Depression, she said, when I go back to America, I see homeless folks begging on the streets. I see hungry, starving people. But when I go to the Soviet Union and I see the people coming together to build new industries and build up their country and build a whole new land, and I see people of different nationalities coming together, what I'm seeing in the Soviet Union, that's the American mindset. She said the Soviet Union is the new America, and communism is 20th century Americanism. That's what Anna Louise Strong said, because that hope, that belief we can get to something better, that belief that we can overcome our hardship, it's been hijacked for so much bullshit optimism, for libertarianism, for all kinds of silly idealism in the United States. What's that video thing people like, The Secret, where you just sit there and go, money, 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 and money appears? All this bullshit, right? But the only way to truly be hopeful, the only way to really fight for a better future is to get beyond capitalism, to get beyond a system where money rules. The only way to get beyond this is to have human reason and human intelligence unleashed to greater capacity than ever before. Growth and hope and optimism are really only possible with socialism. So if you really want to believe in that American mindset and growth and hope and future, you have to become a socialist. And if you get rid of the racism, you get rid of the colonialism, you get rid of the stupid jingoism and American chauvinism, if you just get that hope and that optimism and that dream, Americanism can be socialism, right? That American mindset that we can overcome, we can achieve something, that mindset and socialism, they fit together like a glove. The essence of the American optimism and the essence of socialism walk hand in hand. So that's really what I want to say. That's my comment, and I thank you for calling on me, Dustin, giving me an opportunity to make a comment during the Q&A. Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you, Comrade Caleb Maupin. Very inspiring as usual. Let's see, we've been going on 2 hours. Maybe we'll cut the Q&A, not go too much longer, 20, 30 minutes or so. We'll start with the members in the video chat. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Comrade Natalie, is there something you would like to contribute or ask any of the guests?
There's nothing that I'd like to ask or contribute.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on, Natalie. Let's see, Comrade Red Robert, is there anything you would like to briefly contribute or ask any of the guests?
No, I think I'll probably wait till a future time to contribute, but I learned a lot today, and I joined late because I had some stuff come up, but I still learned a bit from what I did see. And Caleb, I never knew about your humanitarian aid mission in Yemen. So that was a fascinating story.
Thank you, Comrade Red Robert. Let's see. Caleb, if you could bring any questions or super chats on screen, I could read them and we could discuss them.
Well, we'll just have to see what's being asked here in the chat. I think there are a number of people who are, I guess, would like to probably know the difference between nationalism and patriotism. Perhaps Dust and Michael and Comrade Pella and some of our, they could touch on the difference between nationalism, national chauvinism, and patriotism. So I think that's very relevant to this conversation.
I'd be glad to start to answer that question. It's Center for Political Innovation. We are not homogeneous. There is a variety of viewpoints that come together on the points of unity of being city builders, about being constructive socialism. I think for me personally, I do not advocate American nationalism because America is not a nation. America is a country. America, I support the international American proletariat, including oppressed nations within the United States who may want nothing to do with what we are advocating here, nothing to do, and have the right to have nothing to do with American patriotism. They can have patriotism towards their own oppressed nation. Now, but I do, as myself and a member of the organization, support the line to support American patriotism. And it's very different from the Toby Keith put a boot in your ass national chauvinism and the jingoist and the mindlessness and the America love it or leave it and the corporate pop country bullshit. To me, patriotism, when a lot of people look at the U.S. flag, they're not thinking about, and when they pledge allegiance to the flag or they play the Star Spangled Banner, which has its problems, they're not thinking about the U.S. political system controlled by a few monopoly capitalists and banking interests that will destroy any and all competition. They're thinking about the people they love and their community. They're thinking about their local culture. And they're thinking about making things better for that. And socialism and that type of patriotism go hand in hand. Socialists are fighting for a better future and a better lives of our communities and working class. Anyone else wants to help answer this question? Comrade Pella?
There we go. I'm unmuted now. Okay. There is a term that that seems to be lost in the lexicon of 21st century America, and that term is Tory. There are Tories, and then there are patriots. There are loyalists, and there are patriots. And the term patriotism that gets thrown around by the mainstream, that's not patriotism. That's what we call loyalism, right? They're not the same thing. So the way I look at it is, if you love the ruling class and you love the imperialist narrative, and if you love the myth that is America, the shining city on the hill, that is what we call being a Tory. But if you just love your fellow people, no matter who they are, no matter what they look like, no matter where they come from, that's a form of patriotism. So we have to drum up the term Tory again, because there are a lot of Tories running around who identify both as Republican and Democrat, but there's not a whole lot of patriotism going around. Whereas the people who identify in that duopoly, they don't really love the American people. They just love a certain mythos. Whereas if you're a patriot, you love your people and you hate the ruling class. So there has to be like a revival of the term Tory in this country. There are liberal Tories and there are conservative Tories, but nonetheless, they are Tories. Okay, so we are not Tories, all right. We're revolutionary patriots, as a certain comrade who was in charge of a certain country back in the from 1924 to 1953 said. So there you go, if you get what I'm saying, a certain man of steel. But yeah, revolutionary patriotism. That is what is most desirable, not this nihilistic, I hate everybody who's different than me type of thing. And it goes both in the radical left and radical right. If you just hate people for the sake of hating people, then you're not really worth much, because we're trying to build stuff. We're trying to build a better life for the 99%. And we're not trying to tear them down. So revolutionary patriotism, folks, not Toryism. And that's all I got to say about that.
Great response, Comrade Pella. Let's see. Let's go to the next question. Caleb, this one on screen, is this what we go on to this? Okay. This
We
one.
can all answer it, though. I think it's for everybody, not just me. The person directed it at me, but I think we can all answer it.
Okay. So I'll read it and then we'll answer the question. This is from Luke Watkins at Caleb Maupin. How does socialist patriotism in America relate to the struggle of indigenous people in the United States? And I would like to answer this. The indigenous people are an oppressed nation. When in the Civil War, where the North was fighting for, free labor and free soil, and the South was fighting for the system of slavery, and they moved west, and there was a battle in Kansas, and John Brown, the man behind me, kicked the slavers out by force. There was a little fight of freedom versus slavery. They were on stolen indigenous. This was happening on stolen indigenous land. And when, and for the people in the Southwest, looking back on this, the Union, while it was fighting to, for the coalition of, it was fighting for the coalition of slaves and of workers, of small farmers, again, to the revolution to put down, the slave owning class. They were mass murdering indigenous people. And there was recently, the Buffalo Soldiers recently freed African Americans who also took part in the continued genocide of indigenous people. So these are real issues and problems. But how do we go about changing this? Do we go about like the people like Sakai, the settler himself, who was horrible to the people of Hawaii, and go to all the U.S. workers and say, you are a settler, you are part of the indigenous massacre, you shut up, you have no right to speak, shut up, settler. Is that the correct strategy to fix this? No. I believe this is a tactic of the bourgeoisie to divide the oppressed nations and the working class. And my position is workers' power, black and brown power, power to the indigenous nations, Chicano power, black power, because a victory for one of us is a victory for all of us in the idea of international proletarian solidarity. So a lot of people get, angry with the demand land back. They see land back is kind of something that is ultra left. It's part of that. It's part of that, shut up settler kind of deal. But part of my understanding is if an indigenous nation or a group of indigenous people or even a group of Afro-American people were able to build enough power to actually take a part of the United States land back, that would be a huge victory for U.S. workers against our common enemy, the monopoly capitalists. Okay. So anyone else like to answer that question, or think we should move on?
I want to answer this one, actually.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Harold Sullivan asks, how can we as Marxists explain to average working Americans what the labor aristocracy was and why imperialism no longer needs a middle class in the first world? Now, that's a very important question, because the essence, the very essence of Trumpism, make America great again, is the delusion that you can restore the aristocracy of labor, that he is the new Ronald Reagan. He's coming in there fighting communism. The enemy is communism. And he's going to somehow make the aristocracy of labor come back. He's going to bring back the factories. He's going to bring back the industrialization. He's going to bring the 1950s back. That is the essence of Trumpism. And it's an illusion. It's an illusion primarily, I would say, because, first of all, the main killer of the aristocracy of labor is not trade deals. The main killer of the aristocracy of labor is technology. Steel mills now employ exponentially fewer people than they employed during the 1950s. And there's still a lot of manufacturing in the United States. We make more bombs and tanks and guns than anybody. We got robots making them, not people. Now, there has been some, the companies have gone global and have manufacturing in many countries. That certainly goes on. But it is mainly the drive of the capitalists to eliminate labor from the assembly line that has gotten rid of the American industrial worker. And that's affecting the entire global working class. But one thing that needs to be said, and I think this is very important, in the precursor, in the lead up to the American Revolution, there was a religious movement in the United States called the Great Awakening. And in the lead up to the Second American Revolution, which Marxists call the Civil War, there was a religious movement called the Second Great Awakening. And in fact, one of my ancestors, Charles G. Finney, he was a leader of the Second Great Awakening, and he was a very prominent minister in this religious movement. And one of the main themes of the Second Great Awakening, which has had a huge impact on American culture, tent revival, prayer services come from the Second Great Awakening. Many of the religions that are very prominent in the United States today, like Mormonism, like Seventh-day Adventism, can be traced back to the Second Great Awakening. And the song that was the theme song of the Second Great Awakening was the hymn Amazing Grace. And I don't know if people are familiar with that hymn, but what it was a hymn written by a slave trader. And he was on his way to Africa to go pack his ship full of slaves and bring them back to the United States. And his ship got into a storm, and he had a religious experience when his ship was in a storm. And he realized that what he had been doing was wrong. And he turned his ship around and abandoned slavery, came back to the United States and wrote this hymn that was part of this mass religious movement called the Second Great Awakening. And there needs to be a level of repentance and rebirth in the United States right now. There absolutely needs to be some of that in the United States right now. There needs to be repentance, because as much as we don't blame the American people for what the imperialists done, and we don't blame the American people for what the empire has done. We don't say that there needs to be an understanding that when life was better for some sections of the American working class, when that so-called American dream existed, all of those cars, all of those refrigerators and hula hoops and television sets, the 1950s American dream, those fancy 1950s cars, they were all dripping in blood. The blood of the people in the Middle East, the blood of the people in Africa and Asia, the blood of the black people in the South being lynched under Jim Crow, the blood of the indigenous people, and that there needs to be a recognition that the only way we can really have socialism in the United States is if the whole country is reborn on new foundations. We can't build socialism on the basis of the American state and the American system as it currently exists. There needs to be an entire rebirth and resurrection of the United States on new values. And that has to go on. And while we do not blame the American workers for it, we also must be real about the reality of where that labor aristocracy bribe came from, and how we have to say we don't want it to come back. We want to stand in solidarity with the people of the world against imperialism.
Great response, Comrade Caleb Moppin. Let's see, any more questions? You are muted, Caleb. Oh, let's see. Well, if there's not any more questions, I think we'll call it a night.
Well, it's been an amazing press conference. I learned so much. I didn't know half of that stuff about Lincoln, and I mean, this was amazing. So, thank you, folks. Do you want to close us out, Dust, with some remarks, and then we can end?
Sure. Thank you, Comrade Pella, Michael, Comrade Caleb Moppin, Kayla, and Chris, who had to leave early. These were great presentations from a variety of guests from different backgrounds and different points of view, coming together on the idea that we want a better future. We want to live in a better world. We do not want to be plagued by this small group of bankers that exploits our labor, denies us health care and education. And we do not want to be part of these ongoing, continuous wars that mass murder our brothers and sisters in the global South. And we do not want to be part of a world economy where the same group of bankers here that are exploiting us here will overthrow countries, assassinate leaders, all to maintain the very political economic system of oppressed nations all around the world to serve their interests. We, the international proletariat, have our own interests, and we will promote peace, prosperity, freedom, and socialism. The Center for Political Innovation is a rebirth for a new America. And we are getting to the masses. We are building programs, we're building political education, and we will have a new socialist America. Thank you, comrades, and good night.